Who wears a hockey jersey on a fantasy football show? Let's just start with that.
Because it's a hockey night in Pittsburgh, Alex. That's why.
It is. I was actually going to buy tickets, but I knew I couldn't miss tonight's show. This was much more important to me. What is up, everyone? We are back with another week of the Fantasy Alpha radio show. Today we are here with Alex, Jack, and myself, Dominic. Some people call me San Pablo on Thursday nights. JB is not joining us this week because it's his birthday tonight, and he is celebrating at the local gentleman's club, I think Controversy. So maybe he'll FaceTime in with a girl on his side. We'll get some input from him, but I think he's out for the count tonight. So shout out to JB.
Happy birthday, JB.
Happy birthday, JB. Let's hop into the news of the week. As always, Dak Prescott, fumbles on national TV Sunday night. Yet again, gets crushed by the 49ers.
Typical. Love it.
What you expect from the Cowboys. I thought they'd be better contenders this year, but I don't know. It seems like they're trending in the wrong direction already. In other news, the Bill Belichick era seems like it's ended already, officially. I really thought he'd beat the Saints. That's usually a game he would win. But when the Saints put up 34 points at your own stadium, Belichick isn't who he used to be. So I think we could count him out officially if you guys already haven't. And, we have to mention Taylor Swift. I kind of figured that she wouldn't make it out to the cold Minnesota weather. But she might be a good luck charm because she missed the game and then Kelsey goes out with an injury. Luckily, he came back, but I'm sure the local news and everything will keep track of that as the season goes on. But how was everyone's fantasy week?
Absolutely terrible, Dom.
Terrible. Oh,
terrible. Well, no. Okay. It was terrible, but with a little bit of an asterisk. I'm somewhat happy, though, going into this week because someone on the bottom screen lost as well. So,
man.
Down with the ship. It's a win in my book as long as this fool who doesn't know he's on a fantasy football
We're supposed to be on the same team here, Alex. We're on the same podcast, man.
No. We need to keep this going. I need everyone to know how I feel about you and your fantasy team. Anyway, bad game. The injury bug keeps haunting me. The lack of running back play still was hurting me a lot. And then in the other league, not the one Jack and I are in, Aaron Jones is questionable all week, even leading in the Monday morning, an hour and a half before game time. He's rolled out. I was only down 10 points. I was projected to win, but he decides, nope, hamstring's no good. So, Aaron Jones, I'm a little mad at you.
Man, so what's your records right now?
2-3 in both leagues.
Yeah, I'm 2-3, and then I think I'm 2-3 in both of my leagues.
So Jack, you lost both games this week.
Yeah, it was a rough week. Shout out to the Penguins, though. First of all, it's a hockey night in Pittsburgh. I also lost this week in fantasy. Unfortunately, a little bad management this week. Had Zach Moss on my bench. Thought JT was going to get more playing time than he did, but they were just slowly working him in, I guess. And JT put up some numbers this week. I don't want to say it because it's too many points that I'd let go. Also, the bye week bug got to me this week. A lot of my wide receivers, I didn't care to take into account who had bye weeks when I drafted them, but I was bleeding for wide receivers this week, so I didn't have many good ones to play. But my highlight, I always look at highlights. Alex, you're always the con guy. I'm looking for pros on my team, looking for some potential. Darren Waller had his best week in fantasy football.
He did.
16.6 points, and he's ranked as a tight end 10, sneakily. But his boy Daniel Jones, which was my starting quarterback, hurt his neck. So that doesn't help things. Yeah, I don't know why I'm still trusting the Giants in anything they do, but highlight Darren Waller. He's starting to show up for my team. So we'll bounce back. We always do. It's early in the season. I know JB'd say that if he was here. So it's early.
Yeah, surprisingly, it was a pretty strong week for tight ends. I'm 2-3 in one of my leagues. I started 0-3, so we're bouncing back.
Yeah.
And my other league, I started 3-0. Now I'm 3-2. So, as always, going back to the median, not the best yet, but hopefully we'll get there by the end of the year. But I started Dallas Goedert yet again. He finally had a good game with like 28 points. So he helped me win a pivotal game this week for my 1-3 team. So, going in the right direction. But other than that, I think the viewers are most interested in what ended up happening with that trade between Alex and Jack last week. Let's start off with that.
Yeah, Alex, why don't you go and tell him, man?
Well, I mean, I guess I kind of foreshadowed it based on what I had said. My running back play sucks because that trade wasn't going to go through. It wasn't going to be advantageous. I couldn't. You know what? Our producer Chris, he convinced me. He really did convince me. I was like, I need running backs real bad, but it's so hard to give up the best quarterback in the league right now, and there is still a chance Zach Wilson bounces back and is a somewhat competent QB to get Garrett Wilson the ball.
No chance of that. I just had to bust in here and say, what are you thinking about?
Well, enough to get him the ball. He's the only one he's going to throw to.
You may be right about that.
It's back-to-back weeks of him not looking abysmal.
Yeah, not looking abysmal that's great in fantasy, I guess.
That may be enough for Garrett Wilson to have good games.
I was proud of you for a second, but then I mean, are you going to hang your hat on Zach Wilson? Are you really going to do that?
Well, that was my whole argument when I was trying to get rid of him, is that he was going to be bad.
Yeah, well, that's true. I guess that's true. What was the Daniel Jones thing last week? That's what we were talking about, right?
Well, yeah, Jack was going to give me Daniel Jones, but
right.
I was going to get rid of him.
Yeah,
a placeholder.
Yeah,
Daniel Jones just to fill up that QB spot, just so he had someone in there.
Right, and now he's injured, right? So, yeah. So good move, Alex.
Yeah, I'm still lost, but I still have my pride.
That's right.
And what was the full trade package, just to remind the viewers that aren't watching, they're listening to us on the radio right now?
I was going to give up Herbert and Wilson. He was going to give me Daniel Jones, Joe Mixon, and Michael Pittman. Mixon had a pretty good game.
Yeah, he did all right. He had 13 points, but
hey, it's better than mine. I think I had combined 11 points out of my record.
Your team's bad. My team's good. So
same record, irrelevant.
Well, more points which is all that really matters. So
we're both not going to make the playoffs at this point if the season ended now.
You're not wrong, but it's not over.
Yeah, I think overall it was probably smart that trade didn't go through for both of you. I think it'll work out in both your favors. But I think that's definitely a segment we should include, in further episodes. Like whenever you guys have a trade, we could bring that up. But let's hop into our first topic of the day. Viewers, if you're listening, we're going to hop in and talk about the Week 5 studs. Alex, you want to start off with this one?
Sure. Let's go with the return of Cooper Kupp. 8 receptions, 118 yards. Pretty darn good day for someone who's been having a nagging hamstring injury. Good to see him back. I know they lost, but it seemed like he just left off like he didn't have an injury in the past. So shout out to him. And for my other league, got to give a continued shout out to Adam Thielen. Another dominant game by him. Yeah, I know Jack's happy about that too.
My dog.
Well, let's see, 11 catches, $107, 1 touchdown. He's just rolling.
He's
He's
a
doing it
spry
for
old
the
man.
old guys playing the position.
He's a spry old man.
Yeah. How about you, Jack? What are your studs?
Well, I mean, I don't know how you don't mention these guys, as in Jamar Chase and DJ Moore. I mean, they had unreal weeks this week. Jamar Chase, the Bengals had a bounce back week. I mean, he had over 50 fantasy points. Jamar Chase, excuse me, he's targeted 19 times. I mean, I don't think anybody else saw the ball at all. 15 catches, 192 yards, and 3 touchdowns. His counterpart, Joe Burrow, similarly bounce back game with 317 yards and 3 touchdowns. So it was good to see the Bengals perform, I guess, for fantasy owners, not for those AFC North people like us, for the Steelers. But yeah, Jamar Chase with the bounce back game. I mean, he was number 1, number 2 pick in fantasy football leagues. So for him to actually show up, I think it's great for fantasy football owners that have him. DJ Moore was shocker of the week. I got a chance to watch that whole game with the Bears. I mean, Justin Fields, his other counterpart as well, having back-to-back great weeks. Interesting to see what happens with the Bears and where they go. DJ Moore, 230 yards and 3 touchdown receptions. Justin Fields, 282 yards, four touchdowns, and 32.7 fantasy points. And then our boy, last but not least, George Pickens, had a breakout game, I believe, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which that game was. JB is usually our go-to Steeler breakdown guy, but yeah, that game was abysmal. But George Pickens was the highlight of that, so he's my other stud this week. 10 targets, 6 catches, 130 yards, and 1 touchdown. Go Steelers.
Ooh.
I will admit that I was wrong last week when I told the fans to sit at home because yet again we somehow beat the Ravens. I think that's like 8 of 9 that we've beat them the past 9 games. So Mike Tomlin has Jim Harbaugh's, or is it John Harbaugh's number still. So Steelers have some life in them. That defense holding us together. I'm going to add George Kittle to the studs. Another guy with 3 TDs this week, having another resurgence. He's usually a focal point for tight ends in fantasy. So he seems to be trending in the right direction, even though that's not typically a pass-heavy offense. He's still fantasy relevant, it seems. So he was definitely one of my studs for the week. I know I keep saying Alvin Kamara, but I gotta, toot my own horn for being right about him. He's a top 5 paid running back in the NFL, so I assume he will continue to get those touches, those catches. And so far, he's outperforming Chris Olave in fantasy point wise. So I think they'll continue to rely on Alvin as the weeks continue. And I'm also going to mention, again, Devin Achane from the Dolphins. He's, I think, number 1 or 2 in fantasy points for the running back position. Another waiver wire pickup early in the year. So have to give him credit. I honestly think he might be contending for Rookie of the Year, maybe with like CJ Stroud right now, just because of how well he's doing. He put up 150 yards this week, another touchdown, continuing to dominate his game. So those are definitely some of my studs that I wanted to mention. But there's also a lot of duds that I have on my list for this week. Why don't you start off with this one, Jack?
Yeah, so I had 2 duds this week. One was on both of my fantasy teams. I had James Cook this week. 3 carries for a whopping -4 yards.
Oh, yeah.
Thankfully, he caught 3 receptions for 25 yards to make up a little over 4 points, fantasy points. So you hate to see that for a starting running back who I've been high on this whole year. But everybody has a bad week. Alex, you have a lot of bad weeks, but that's just management. But James Cook, I'm looking for him to bounce back. But yeah, this week was not too good in the Jaguars, but I'll blame it on the travel. I mean, going to London, the Jaguars, that game was ridiculous. Like, I don't know what London's deal is with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know we talked about that last week, which could be a topic at some point. Or like, is Jacksonville going to leave Jacksonville? Are they trying to get London to like invest in their team? Will we have our first international NFL team? I guess it wouldn't be called the NFL, but we could change the name of the NFL. Something to think about. And then Davante Adams is my other dud this week. I got a chance to watch that whole game as well. They were just doubling the whole game. They gave Jacoby Myers a chance to show up. I know we don't have a stock rising agenda for today, but if we did have one, Jacoby Myers would be my go-to one. Davante Adams, 4 receptions, 45 yards. Just an below average game for Davante Adams. They try to get him the ball. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think he had 2 or 3 interceptions. He does not look comfortable. He's got like happy feet in the pocket. If you got a chance to watch him, he just starts like chopping his feet. It's pretty funny to watch. So that's a worry for Davante Adams owners like myself. If he's not getting the ball, if he's not throwing it to Davante. He had two targets in the red zone, which is good. Jimmy's looking for him in the red zone, which is what you want to see. Touchdowns win us games, win us fantasy football games. So I'm looking for a bounce back week for Davante and James Cook, but they were my duds this week. Alex, how about you?
Oh, so many, but so many. I'm going to start with someone on my team that is absolute garbage. Brandon Cooks, my man. I'm looking at this right now. He has not in a PPR league. He has no more than 6.7 fantasy points in any game this year. And this is supposed to be kind of a pass-heavy offense. He is garbage, absolute garbage. I'm going to get rid of him. He's terrible. I'm done with him. Star here, Devontae Smith, 1 reception, 6 yards for the Eagles. Even though Goddard and Brown had big games, 100-plus yards each for them. But a little shocking seeing Devontae Smith with really, really subpar game. So look for him to bounce back. Another dud, Mac Jones. Love to see, low-key, love to see the Pats struggling a little bit. A little less ball tapping for Mac Jones would probably do him a little good, with all those little cheap shots that he does. And, 110 pass yards, 2 interceptions. That's a pretty terrible stat line. That's like Jack's 5th grade recess quarterback stat line way back when.
Roll the highlights.
Ladies and gentlemen, candy arm. Through and through, candy arm.
Shout out to Bud, who has an actual candy arm.
Oh, man, I'd love to get that guy on this podcast. And another one, not so much from a stat perspective, but more from an availability. Availability is kind of a skill in sports. This early on, for a rookie, having Anthony Richardson out again. I know first one was concussion. Now it's a shoulder. I know from a fantasy perspective, when he's available, that he could fill up some stat lines with going through the air, running on the ground. But the fact that he's now out for a second time, we're not even a third of the way through the season, that's a little bit concerning for fantasy owners. So I'm going to say that's a dud. How about you, host?
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Alex. I had Anthony Richardson on my list. He was one quarterback I never really had faith in going into the season, even though he was really hyped up. I think a lot of teams like that archetype quarterback, run and gun, but I just never was really confident on him staying healthy, and he's kind of proving my theory correct. I think he's been injured in 3 of 5 games. 2 of them he had to stay out. I can't rely on, if I was a GM or coach, my QB being out that many times if they're going to lead me to the playoffs or Super Bowl. So for this year, I might be out on Anthony Richardson overall. And then, Jack, I wanted to ask you about Davante Adams. Do you think, with how this year is going, I kind of mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but do you think Davante Adams will be asking to kind of leave the Raiders if they're not really competitive like they have been?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure what his contract deal is, but he looked frustrated on the sidelines. If they're not even going to throw him the ball, why do you have a top receiver on your team if you're not even going to play call in his favor? They were running a lot of these little bubble screens. They were not giving up on Josh Jacobs. They're They never give up on the run. They continue to hand off the ball to Josh Jacobs. That was not working against the Green Bay Packers defense. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Jimmy G, I know he's handsome, Dom. I know you're a fan. But quarterback-wise, play-wise, he's not the best. So, yeah, you can just see the frustration on Devontae's face, which opens up receivers like Jacoby Myers. What's their other little wide receiver's name from Clemson? Can't remember his name. Alex, I'm looking at
Hunter Renfrow.
Hunter Renfrow. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
non-existent for fantasy owners.
Yeah.
He was pretty consistent last year. I think I had him on my bench. I threw him in there a couple of times, but just talking about the Raiders in general, they somehow snuck out a win that game. Not thanks to Devontae Adams, but I mean, if you get wins, I don't know if Devontae Adams is just looking to scoop by with wins, but they find ways to win. I guess it's worth to see it through, but I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts? Alex, what's your thoughts on Devontae Adams?
I think in my opinion, I think we're getting past the point of Jimmy G being a formidable starting quarterback in the NFL anymore. I'm totally with you. He had happy feet every time he dropped back last night. And Green Bay's pass rush wasn't even that fantastic last night. I just think that if you're relying on Jimmy G to get your wide receivers the ball, I think it's real shaky. You never know with it, because any offense that's going to be led by Jimmy G is going to be probably run heavy more so than anything.
Yeah, I have to agree with you guys. I guess we have to add Jimmy G to the duds for now and moving forward, just because of his performance so far. And then one last thing I wanted to mention before hopping into my duds. I had a question for Alex. Do you think that overall the Patriots, they should be, kind of benched moving forward if you have one of their players, just because of how terrible they're doing?
Oh, yeah. I think, based on all the reports of the off-field issues Mac Jones has had over the last 2 years, I think seems like they're just completely done with him. And, if I were them looking at this upcoming NFL draft, this is one of the top-notch quarterback talent coming out of college. Why wouldn't you somewhat bail? Honestly, because last year Bailey Zappi filled in for him a couple times. He wasn't that bad. Honestly, with these weapons right now, you're probably the lack of weapons, I should say. I see really no difference in what Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi would do. So, if one's going to have the attitude problem and all the issues with the coaches, why not just throw the other one who doesn't have it and just let it ride out from there? Because I think the season's lost. You throw running game's terrible. Stevenson and Elliott aren't doing anything, and you lose Juju Smith-Schuster to a head injury. Not that he was lighting up the scoreboard at all fantasy-wise either, but you lose one of your starting receivers. I say all fantasy owners just jump ship.
That's interesting, Alex. I feel like you were high on Zeke a couple weeks ago.
Oh, okay, yeah, a couple weeks ago. Now we kind of let everything play out a little bit. We see how this is all going. And, I have Zeke in the other league, but that's the league that I have 14 teams in, so there's no running backs available. Literally, if you look at right now in a 14-team league, for anyone who would be listening that is in a 14-team league, if you go to available running backs in these leagues, I'm looking at it right now, the highest projected points from any free agent is 4.9 points.
Ooh.
I have Zeke, I have the injury bug right now. Zeke's projected 8 points. You have to roll. You have to roll with them, because if you're not going to get any trade requests, you literally have nobody.
Yeah, I'm officially out on the Patriots, so that was a good mention from you, Alex. I'm just going to add a couple more players to the list. You guys mentioned a few I had, but I'm going to add Miles Sanders to the dud list. 5 points last week. the Panthers traded for him last year. He was a pretty good player on the Eagles, so you kind of expect him to, ball out on the Panthers. So far this year, he's not doing very well. He's trending in the wrong direction. So definitely I'm considering sitting Miles Sanders for the weeks to come. He's on one of my teams. Another player I'll mention is CeeDee Lamb. He's also on one of my fantasy teams. Right now, he's wide receiver 20, and he's not scoring very well fantasy point-wise. I think he had like 12 points this week. And, he was trending pretty high in the drafts, so you expect him to at least be in the top 10 consideration for wide receivers. But right now, he's sitting at wide receiver 20. And then I'll add another wide receiver I have in my three-headed dragon. I'll add Chris Olave to the list. And I think it's because Derek Carr really isn't who maybe some of us thought he was. He's not doing very good at all this year. And I really expected that connection between him and Olave to be good this year. But right now, Olave's sitting at wide receiver 25 through the 5 weeks. And even though he had a touchdown this week, he only had 9 points, which isn't good for your wide receiver too. So yeah, those are 2 star wide receivers that, I assume a lot of people were starting each week, but right now I don't think they're performing to their fantasy value. So for this week, I'll add them to the duds list. But yeah, that's all I had. Oh, I also had James Cook, but again, he had negative yards, which is never a good sign. So let's transition to another topic. If you're listening in, we're going to talk about the injury report roundup and the fantasy implications involving it. One of the best players in fantasy was put on the IR today. Justin Jefferson, this is huge fantasy implications. I mean, he's like wide receiver number 1 or 2, and he's most likely going to be out for at least 4 games, maybe a little more, depending if the Vikings are like 2-6 by then or whatever. But Jack, what do you think about the Justin Jefferson injury?
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing against him this week, so I'm sad, happy, lucky, all those types of feelings. Yeah, it's just so unfortunate. I mean, not that it's ever a waste of a number 1 pick, but I mean, you can't predict injuries. You can't predict so much of fantasy football. And yeah, it's just part of the game, unfortunately. So I'm feeling lucky this week. We'll see if I can still pull out a win. But yeah, it's just sad. I mean, that offense, Kirk Cousins is playing great fantasy wise. I know they're not winning games. And I honestly am a low key Vikings fan, and I was hoping for them to bounce back. But when they lose their star player, that's really tough. But I see a couple waiver wire picks. I know we're not that section, but looking at DJ Osborne, I believe. He might be. I mean, they're going to be looking for – I don't think they're going to be changing the game plan for the Vikings. I mean, they're a running gun. Offense, Alexander Madison had a bounce back week, so they're getting the run game going. Hopefully the passing game isn't affected too much. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. Yeah, it's just such a bummer for Justin Jefferson owners. That's just part of the game. I don't know if he's worth, even a trade talk. I mean, if you need wins now, if you're looking to sell high, I mean, he's had great start to the season, and we know he'll bounce back once he gets back and healthy, or he might not. I mean, those injuries can really drain a guy. Yeah, I don't know if you start looking at trade talks, maybe just seeing what's out there. If you have more faith in other guys that you might be worth a trade. I don't know. I'm not a big trade guy. I like the team that I pick, but
clearly,
yeah, you didn't accept my trade. Whatever. Go ahead. What are your thoughts on Justin Jefferson?
I honestly, I do agree. I would honestly lean toward, with how this is, being that it's a hamstring injury for a wide receiver, everything that he has to be able to do. If he has to go in the IR for us, this must be pretty serious, and this isn't just a tweak. And being that he's arguably the best receiver in the league, and they want to be that cautious with him. And it's still so early in the season. It's not like they're completely down for the count. Like they're not out of playoff contention or like their season's not completely over, obviously. But the fact that he's out that long leads me to believe that that's probably a more serious injury than we think. And you could get if someone is desperate to get him in a fantasy league, I'm sure you could get a nice little trade out of him. But yeah, I saw, I think Osborne's projected like 13 fantasy points this week. So yeah, if, like you said, if waiver wire pickup, go out and get Osborne because he's probably going to be getting a lot more touches.
Yeah, I don't like when you agree with me, Alex, but
I'm kind of nauseous just saying all of this.
I mean, if it's any hope, I know Cooper Kupp, he had a hamstring injury too, right? And he's bouncing
Yeah, he had
back.
to go to like a hamstring specialist. Never even heard of that.
Right. I mean, he bounced back right from the get-go, as you mentioned earlier. I guess I'll shout you out too. But I think it's interesting. Yeah, even for teams that are not that any of us are 4-0, 5-0. Yeah, if you want to give up some players just in order to, I mean, you could probably take a couple losses here while he's sitting on your bench. But just keep him in your back pocket for future runs of the playoffs and possibly the championship. But Dom, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's obviously sad that he got injured. He's definitely, I think, my favorite wide receiver in the league. But I think the fantasy implications are huge. I would say there's like 4 or 5 players that I could talk about right now that they might be, better or worse because of this injury. First off, I'll start off with TJ Hawkinson. I know he's Kirk Cousins, one of his favorite tools. I was looking at how many targets he has this year. He has 39, which is already more than Travis Kelce, more than CeeDee Lamb, more than Amon St. Brown, more than DJ Moore. So these are, some pretty big names that he has more targets overall. And I think that'll only increase now that Justin Jefferson is out. So I think depending how long Jefferson is out, Hawkinson could stay in that conversation as a top 1 or 2 tight end moving forward. Just because I can imagine him bailing Kirk Cousins out a lot in that red zone. Another player is Jordan Addison. I know he was going pretty high for a rookie wide receiver. So I think his fantasy owners will be pretty it's obviously sad that someone got injured, but I think Jordan Addison fantasy owners will be happy because he'll have that opportunity to ascend to the wide receiver 1 in that offense. And as you guys mentioned, there's also KJ Osborne. I don't want to hop ahead to the waiver wire pickups yet, but I just wanted to mention that he has 2 TDs this year already, so I think he'll stay involved in that offense as well now that Justin Jefferson is out. And I'm also wondering if they're going to switch to, running the ball more, or if they're going to stay that gun-heavy, pass-heavy offense. So there's all types of implications. The Vikings have only won 1 game this year. So I could definitely see Jefferson sitting out. If he isn't fully healthy, there's no really point in him coming back if they're like 2-7 in a couple weeks. But yeah, Justin Jefferson, definitely one of the biggest injuries this year, along with Aaron Rodgers. So those are kind of my thoughts on the fantasy outlook for all of those players on the Vikings offense.
I think a positive injury report. I mean, obviously you don't want anybody to get hurt, but Daniel Jones, neck injury. Maybe we'll see a little resurgence in New York. I have no idea who his backup is. I just know he's hurting on my team. I don't know how serious the injury is, but honestly, I got a little excited for Giants fans, for especially my boy Darren Waller, to see if someone else will be throwing the ball this week. But
And they're at Buffalo.
yeah.
He's probably looking around like, I might just want to take this week off.
Yeah, stay in his warm little $1 million house, I'm sure.
Yeah, the New York football teams might be cursed. Like, they haven't really been relevant for years. Like, and that's a huge market in the NFL. Like they have 2 football teams there. It's kind of sad to see, the New York teams failing as much as they are. But that's another injury I had on the injury report. Daniel Jones. Never really liked him, but it's sad to see him get injured. And I'm sure that GM is not sleeping well at night considering all that money they put into him last year. So, but I do not know how long Daniel Jones will be out. Could be a couple weeks, but
Yeah, I think it was week to week.
yeah, week to week.
Yeah.
Another big injury I had was James Conner. He's been top 5 running back surprisingly this year in yards. Sad to see him go down. He's also been placed on the IR. Wanted to hear your thoughts on his injury and fantasy point implications. Jack, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean H2P, James Conner, drafted by the Steelers, moved to Arizona. Yeah, I mean I'm not the biggest fan of James Conner. I know last year he was just a touchdown machine, and that was the main way he got fantasy points. So in terms of fantasy, I just don't like that reliance on touchdowns. But this year, he's obviously shown that he doesn't need to score touchdowns in order to get fantasy points. He's been catching a lot of balls out of the backfield. They're running a lot of screens, a lot of plays based around him. Yeah, I know we're not going to waiver wire pickups, but his backup's on my list. Joshua Dobbs, I know Mr. Chopin over there is very high on Dobbs, who's also a dual threat quarterback who likes to run the ball. The Arizona Cardinals are turning it around, it seems like. They're an exciting team to watch. But, yeah, I just think any injury in the run game opens up the passing game as they try to find a replacement for him. Do we know his timeline on how long he's going to be out for? Is he also week to week? I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think he's week to week too.
Yeah.
He's not on IR.
Oh, he's not on IR? Oh, okay.
So, no.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, just to round out the injury report, I know we're kind of running over our schedule right now, and we have some topics we want to get into, but I'll just name a few off. Anthony Richardson, as we mentioned. Matt Milano on the Bills. I think that's a pretty significant injury. He's on the defense. And the Bills are they're number 2 in fantasy points this year on the defensive end. So I think that could be a significant injury, depending how long he's out. So I figured I'd throw his name in. I like, mentioning the defense every now and then. But I think that'll be a good segue into one of our topics. Alex, why don't you start off this segment since it was kind of your idea?
All right, so this is among Jack and I's fantasy league. We've discussed this a little bit, not too much at length, but it's a nice little debate topic that I think is worth kind of noting and make other fantasy leagues think about this going forward. One of this big topic is it worth keeping defenses and kickers in fantasy football leagues? Or do you get rid of that and add another flex position or another wide receiver position? So among our fantasy league, we had a little bit on both sides. A couple people like this. A couple people said no way. Want to stick to the traditional model. But anymore, and on these different platforms, you're able to edit how your fantasy league looks. It's not just all cut and dry the way that you absolutely have to have it. So you have the ability to take it off if you want. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Let's start with Jack. What do you think? Do you think let's stick with it? Seems like PPR leagues are the most popular type of fantasy football leagues out there. So do you think it's worth keeping defenses and kickers in PPR leagues?
I think the short answer for me is yes. We've been playing fantasy football since I was in like 5th grade, which is like 15 years. And it's always been the same setup. Always been the defenses. My strategy last year was honestly pick up a defense to help me win games. And it's true. I mean, I mentioned it last week. Defense wins championships. By the way, the Detroit Lions only had 7 fantasy points, so it wasn't the best pickup, but they didn't have negative fantasy points. But to the topic, I mean, it's just a whole roundabout team. I mean, I get excited when my kicker gets on the field to kick a field goal. I don't care if it's an extra point or not. Every point matters. I know they do change the game, and that is frustrating as hell, especially when you're playing against a defense that just decides to go off and scores 3 touchdowns, 4 fumble recoveries, just has 30 points. I mean, it changes games, but I kind of like the extra layer of strategy. Just being able to look at matchups. I mean, I love looking at strength of schedule before I go into fantasy football drafts. Which teams match up with which, who's got the easiest schedule, who's got the hardest schedule. Week to week, I think just looking at the whole board, you can see what defenses are matching up. So I want to say yes. I'm also have been prone to lose to defenses and kickers because of kickers. So, but I'm a traditional guy. I like to keep it classy. I like to keep the standard. The standard is the standard. So I've never done a league without one. Maybe that's something we try next year. But I'm taking the side of keep them. Keep the kickers, keep the defense, and carry on.
How about you, host?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Jack's, analysis. I'm definitely gonna keep both positions. I'm a big Justin Tucker fan, even though he only has 5 field goals this year, which is surprising, don't you think? Like, he's regarded as like kicker number 1, really isn't performing this year. But I think it's always interesting to, look at the matchups each week and see. You could kind of tell sometimes maybe a kicker will get 4 field goals this week, depending on who their opponent is. So I'm definitely one of those fantasy players who drop and pick up kickers week to week, depending on how I think they'll do. Defense, I think it's just as important. I mean, if we get rid of defenses in fantasy, that's kind of eliminating like 15 players on the football team that are pretty pivotal. So I don't really like, counting them out, even though it's much more entertaining to get a lot of points. So maybe you could replace them with a QB or a wide receiver slot. But I think it's really fun when a team goes out and gets like 30 points, scores more than maybe even your QB for the week, and then that defense wins you your week matchup. So those are always fun times I look forward to in fantasy, even though a lot of the times, like Jack mentioned, that you're on the receiving end of losing to those type of performances. But I'm definitely all about keeping the defense and the kicker positions. I use the Sleeper platform. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. And that platform allows you to, add or subtract positions. I don't know if you could do much of that in ESPN. I don't use ESPN a lot, but in one of my leagues, we added a wide receiver and a QB slot, and we kept the kicker and defense in. So I don't think it's really necessary to get rid of those positions. And I always look forward in the drafts to see and kind of predict which defense will be good all year, depending on their strength of schedule. But Alex, what do you think about these 2 positions?
His mic might be dead, but let me take the other side of the
Okay.
for conversation's sake. I just think, I don't know, it is tough. I mean, like you said, we're both been on the receiving ends of those tough losses that we had really nothing to do with. And I think it'd be interesting to add an extra wide receiver. I mean, get to those deep, grinding rookie guys that are catching 3 balls a game or getting the chance. I know I can see it as an advantage for keeper leagues, especially if you draft those rookies late in order to fill those spots that you need to fill on your team. Do you throw another flex position? Do you open more, or even just another tight end position? Have 2 tight ends. 32 teams in the league, 32 tight ends. It'd be interesting to have 2 tight ends, just making it more of a, or even just update, I don't know, to how you can score points. Like I know one of our leagues we have, you get a point for every time your team wins. I mean, points like that, you can kind of get crafty with different ways you can score points. I don't know if blocking is, I know there's plenty of blocking tight ends. If you get any points for like, I don't know, blocking for a touchdown or something, get crazy with the points. I think that could be an exciting way to mix up a league and make it non-traditional. I think there's a lot you can do with fantasy that I think people just like to stick with what they know, which is, I think it's worth the try. I mean, I'm kind of thinking about it for next year. Just to give it a shot. I mean, do you even, I know leagues have 2 quarterbacks. I mean, do you put 2 quarterbacks in? Do you double up on tight ends? Do you add another wide receiver? Running backs? Like the mix and match, I think could be sweet. I don't know if you're allowed to even update like every week, just like switch up, maybe have 2 quarterbacks, two tight ends a different week. I think there's a lot. I think the main reason for this conversation is just, to bring up the different things you can do with fantasy football. The different ways that you can win games, lose games. I think it's interesting topic to talk about for sure. We seem to have lost one of our casters.
Jeez, this is like a whodunit. Now we went from 4 to 2 people now. It's like,
well, they left the best for last, so it's about time we got rid of Alex.
But you're in luck because you have an all-star on your team.
Oh, thank goodness, Chris.
No, I'm good. I can fill in. I can pretend to be Alex. How about that?
Yeah, Chris, we want to know your thoughts. What do you think about kickers and defenses?
What do I think? Well, here's Alex. Let's see if he has. Alex can. I know you can hear us. Let's see if we can hear you. You're back. That's good.
We're back.
Darn.
So you're passing along the old kicker and defense question to me, right?
Right.
Well, I'm old school. I've been playing fantasy football for many, many years, and my thought on it. Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. My thought on that is that kickers and D they're part of the game. And so for me, playing fantasy football, that's part of the strategy. I mean, you're not playing football if you don't have a defense and a kicker. So I do, however, like the flex position that some leagues have. I've always enjoyed that. I played in a league many years ago where the flex position was any player, any position. So, for example, you could start 2 quarterbacks. So, and it wasn't a PPR league. I don't remember the scoring in this league. It was kind of wonky and weird. But the league that I'm in right now, that I've been in for 20 plus years, what I don't like about a lot of these leagues is the way they do kicker points. So, a lot of leagues, if the field goal is, 30 to 39 yards, you get 3 points. If it's 40 to 49, you get 4 points. If it's, and it goes up like that. I have never been a believer in that. And I know it brings strategy into that because obviously, Dom, you mentioned Tucker, he's a money man. That's why he's a number 1 kicker. Who'd have thought he only had 5 field goals this year so far after 5 games? So, I understand if it's going to be a 50-yard field goal or plus, maybe throw in an extra point there, maybe an extra 2 points. Hell, these days they're kicking 60-yard field goals. So maybe for a field goal up to 50 yards, it's 3 points, then it's 4 points, then it's 5 points, because it makes a difference because it's clutch. So it gives a little strategy there. I get it. So my take is kickers and D, they belong in fantasy football. I would not personally play in a league that did not have kickers or D. Anybody want to argue with me?
I agree with that. Alex, what do you think?
No, this was, I wasn't sure if this would end up being a debate or not. There was more of I saw a couple like fantasy articles on different outlets bring that topic up. It happened to come up in our fantasy league. In our draft night, we had a little discussion about it. Nice to see kind of the thoughts. The only way that I could see it being interesting not having them is in a league kind of like JB's, where it's like a 6 or 8 team league and your teams are just stacked all the way around. and you wanted to add an extra flex position because you had like a wide receiver one on your bench because you have like 4 or 5 of them. But other than that, I'm with you guys. I like the traditional model. I like the kicker. Like last year for me, one of the reasons why I I ended up winning a couple of my games last year was literally because of my kicker, because they had like 15 plus points. And a lot of times it's on those kickers that are on terrible teams that can't score touchdowns. Then I'm just raking in like 3 or 4 field goals each game. So and it's kind of like what you said, Chris, too. I like that whole aspect of using a whole football outlook on it, having a defense and kicker, and even get like, I know we're being homers here, but if you're the Steelers defense, they literally could be winning you these games each week because they're scoring touchdowns. so it's the whole all around aspect, I think, is still a good model.
Yeah, and I had a playoff game. My fantasy partners would remember this. I'm bad on the details of these things because once a fantasy week is over, I tend to just forget about it, win or lose. I just I move on to the next week. But a couple of years ago, there was a playoff game where we were up by it was something like 29 points. And it was a Monday night game. Seattle was the defense. It's back when Seattle's D was better. And I remember texting my friend and saying, it's going to be just my luck. Seattle's going to have a great defensive performance tonight. And in our league, defenses can score. They get points for sacks or, the standard. But it was almost unheard of that a defense in our league would score 29 points. Well, wouldn't you know, this defense scored like 33 points and we lost in the playoffs. So there are times when the defense is a big thing. And Antonino comes in and says the Steelers defense did give him a win this week for sure. So, defense is important to some people.
It's his first win in 3 years.
There you go. And that's all I got. I'll let it up to you studs now.
No, I was thinking that most of us would be on the same page on it. One to kind of get the opinion of you fantasy veterans. So no, I'm glad to know we're all kind of on the same page with it.
Yeah, I bet the people writing those articles are the people that have like, I don't know, the Texans defense or something.
Yeah, or they're in like 4-person leagues and
yeah,
worst wide receivers like Jamar Chase.
But I know we're running tight on time right now, so we'll quickly do one of our last topics that I think our viewers want to hear and listen to. Let's hop into the week 6 startums and situms. Jack, who do you have starting for next week?
I got Mr. Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco?
Yeah.
Shout out to JB for how he pronounces Achonche. I was talking about that so much this week. I hope he's listening because that's just incredible. And I love that pronunciation. Kansas City's playing against the Broncos this week, Thursday Night Football. Amazon Prime, shout out. Yeah, I think the Broncos are just abysmal. They're not good on either side of the ball. So I'm looking for Isaiah Pacheco to have a good game, to have a breakout game. I know he's been consistent. But yeah, just looking for production from him. So if I had him, I'd start him. But I don't have him, but I'd start him.
Alex, what about you?
I'm going with Arizona's backup running back filling in for James Conner, Amari DiMercado. It's projected 10.5 fantasy points this week. Not sure how much they'll use him, but they'll need some sort of running game to balance with Josh Dobbs in there. He'll need a little bit of a security blanket. So, with James Conner's injury history being week to week, that could mean 1 week, that could mean 5 weeks. May not be bad to scoop him up and see what he can do.
Yeah, I think he'll fill in pretty well for James Conner being out. Last week, they plugged him into the offense. He had a few catches and he had a touchdown. I think he scored like 13 points last week. So that's definitely a good waiver wire pickup and stardom, I would say, Alex. I'm going to list off 2 players I have. I know I said start Jonathan Taylor last week, but I think they're just being slow introducing him into the offense. if I have Zach Moss, I would try to sell him, to be honest. Unless you're afraid of Jonathan Taylor getting hurt again this year. But I mean, they're paying Jonathan Taylor now $42 million, 3 years. They want good use of that money. So I expect Jonathan Taylor to be back to his normal self, averaging like 18 to 20 points per game for the weeks to come. So I would definitely either buy Jonathan Taylor, or if he's on your bench right now, I would starting him for the weeks to come. And then I know I was out on Nico Collins a few weeks ago, but now that Tank Dell is injured, I would say Nico Collins is a must start moving forward. He definitely became CJ Stroud's number one go-to guy. And the way CJ Stroud is playing, I think he'll keep the Texans competitive in all the games they're in. So I would definitely, I'm putting some respect back on Nico's name. I was wrong on him, I'll admit. So right now he's within the top 15 players in wide receiver this year. So I'm comfortable starting Nico moving forward, especially with Tank Dell out. And then I guess I'll just throw in, this kind of goes in with the game of the week for next week that I have. I'm going to must start CeeDee Lamb. I don't see a scenario where you sit him, but people were kind of down on him just because of his fantasy performance. I think this will be one of his comeback games. I don't think he'll score 12 points. I think we're looking at maybe 25 to 30, just because I think that game will be high scoring on both sides of the field. So Cowboys versus Chargers, I think on both teams, you got to start all those players. I think that's going to be a pretty high scoring game. And then I just wanted to mention one player that I would consider adding. I'm going to add in Quentin Johnston. He could become the wide receiver 2 in the Chargers offense. He's available in 40% of the leagues. And with Mike Williams on injured reserve, I don't think they're going to rely completely on Keenan Allen. So I think they'll start involving Quentin Johnston, the rookie that they drafted pretty high this year. So I expect him to, be fantasy relevant. I don't know if it's going to be this week, but I definitely would add him to your bench. He's only in 43% of leagues right now, so that's definitely someone to look out for. But we only have a couple more minutes left for the show. I just wanted to get Alex and Jack's last thoughts before we kind of sign out.
Detroit versus Tampa. Start everyone. It's going to be a high-scoring game. Take the over on it. All those wide receivers, running backs are going to get their fantasy points. Looking forward to it.
For me, waiver wire pickup, I'm going to mispronounce this. Tajay Spears. Derrick Henry's backup out of Tennessee. He had 7 rushes for 34 yards last week. Derrick Henry, we know, is injury prone. I know he's on my team, as I've mentioned. So it makes me a little nervous, but look at him on the waiver wires. My game of the week, Seahawks versus the Bengals. I'm interested to see if the Bengals keep it rolling. Joe Burrow versus Geno Smith. Jamar Chase versus name eludes me.
Blanking.
Big guy for Seahawks.
DK Metcalf.
Interested to see what that game brings us this week.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the high scoring games for this week. Definitely start all those players if you have players in those games. But as always, I would like to thank the viewers and listeners for joining in and hearing us talk about fantasy football each week. This is one of our highlights of the week. We love talking about football. We'll probably be talking about it for the rest of our lives. So thank you again. You could hear us on Radio PGH, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. And I'll see you guys next week.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Let's go Pens, baby.
Yeah, let's go Pens.
It's a football show.